Hello everybody, welcome to another video on ethics and corporate governance. In this video we will be looking at the topic on executive compensation. We will be exploring the current debates around directors' remuneration. What are some of the key issues that are currently being looked at in the area of directors' remuneration? We will try and have a brief understanding of some of the key elements that make up a director's remuneration package. We'll also have a look at the role of the remuneration committee and also the remuneration consultants that can often be used in developing the right remuneration policies. We'll explore a little bit some of the measures that has been used to actually tie the remuneration package to the performance of the company. And finally, we will have a brief look at the remuneration of non-executive directors and also some of the disclosure requirements with regards to the directors' remuneration, especially of public listed companies. Let's first start by exploring some of the issues surrounding the topic or the area of directors' remuneration. Now, essentially, the idea has been that one of the key things we want to look at with directors' remuneration is how can we use the amount that we compensate the directors as an incentive to align their role as agents to the interests of the principal or shareholders. So in this area where we want to align the interests of both parties, which under the agency relationship is argued to be in conflict, then some of these issues that that is currently being discussed are in the form of the level of the directors' remuneration. How much should we pay the directors? Sometimes is it too much that currently we are paying some of the directors in terms of what we are getting from their performance? And what form should we actually give or compensate the directors? How much should be in cash? How much should be in kind, in benefits, or even in shares? The next issue that is currently being explored is how do we come up with the proper performance measure in order to align the interests of the directors or the management, the executive directors specifically, with the interests of the shareholders? Should we look at short-term measures or should we look at long-term measures? So that's another issue that is currently being explored. We also want to look at the role of the board of directors as an intermediary in order to control and manage the work and the performance of the executive directors. Specifically, the role of the subcommittee of the board, which is the remuneration committee, in performing the function of setting the right compensation packages for the senior executive directors. And finally, what role can shareholders play in monitoring the level of pay of executive directors or managers or the agents? So these are some of the discussion topics that is currently being debated around directors' remuneration. Let's now have a look at some of the key elements that would make up the compensation that is given to directors for their role in managing the company. At the initial level would be what we call base salary. Base salary is the fixed amount of income or salary that the directors will earn on a month-to-month basis. this is often being paid in cash to them as a salary that they take home. And this is done on a monthly basis. The next element would be in the element of a lump sum payment, normally annually, after the release of the performance report of the company, in the form of bonuses. Again, mostly in the form of cash bonuses, or sometimes in the form of shares as well. Another popular element of the director's remuneration package would be stock options. These are options that are given to the directors to be able to buy shares in the company at a fixed price sometime in the future. So these are options given, so this would not be immediately translatable into cash until they acquire the shares and they sell the shares to make a profit. Another form of directors' remuneration could be given in the form of current shares of the company, but there is a restriction for the directors to hold on to the shares for a certain period of time before they can sell and realize it. So that this is in order to prevent directors from trying to profit from the shares immediately, but rather ensure that they keep the shares and they perform, they manage the company well, and with the intention of raising the share value of the company over a long period of time. The next element would be in the form of pensions. These are again one lump sum that or sums over a period of time that are given to the directors as a form of compensation at their retirement age, when they reach retirement age. So these are retirement benefit plans that are given to the shareholders. And finally, directors' remuneration can also be in kind rather than in cash. So this could be things like health benefits for the company, for the directors and their family members, perhaps. Benefits such as houses, travel plans, or even vehicles, cars, and things similar to that. So these are these are not payments in cash, but they are normally benefits in kind that is given to directors. Next, let's now explore the role of the remuneration committee and also what is called remuneration consultants that may sometimes be engaged by the remuneration committee. First, let's look at the remuneration committee, which we've already discussed in detail in the previous video that looks at the structure of the board and the board subcommittees. So the remuneration committee is really tasked to focus on developing a set of formal and transparent procedures in order to reward or develop or come up with the right executive compensation or remuneration packages, right? And these procedures should be made by directors who do not have any executive interests, so it should be best be developed by independent non-executive directors. And in doing that, sometimes the board, the remuneration committee, may refer to what is known as remuneration consultants. This could be done by HR consultants, or even the professional firms such as KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, which also normally has an HR advisory unit within their firm. So these remuneration consultants are basically made up of specialists, and they are third-party specialists, independent specialists, who would advise the company on the right compensation packages to incentivize directors to behave in a manner that would benefit the shareholders over a long-term period. So the use of remuneration consultants really help validate the decisions of the remuneration committee. So the remuneration committee can then report to the shareholders that they have consulted experts in terms of arriving at an appropriate remuneration package, and that is linked to an appropriate performance measure. So speaking of performance measure, let's now have a look at some of the common performance measure that is often used to fix an outcome that the directors must achieve in order to receive the incentives that is provided. This is again part of aligning the interests and behavior of the directors to the needs of the principal and the shareholders. So these performance measures can be classified into market-based measures or accounting-based measures, or sometimes measures that are based on the individual performance of the directors themselves. So market-based measures are basically based on market information such as shareholders' return, a rate of return on the share price of the company. It can also look at the share price itself to ensure to have a targeted share price to be achieved, so that the directors can manage the company to improve their performance, so that the improved performance will have a positive impact on the growth of share prices. And then this profitability can also be measured based on the share price as well. So that's a market-based measure. We can also look at accounting-based measures, so looking at the amount of profit that is being achieved, determining or setting an appropriate target of profit growth, for example. We can also measure using conventional accounting measures of return, such as return on capital employed and earnings per share as well. Now, these market-based measure and accounting-based measure often measures performance based on the company as a whole. But if you wanted to measure individual directors, then you may want to set individual directors' performance perhaps in a specific area that they are in. So whether they are looking at financials, or they are looking at operations, or they are looking at marketing, then specific targets can be set for each individual directors as well. Now let's have a quick look at non-executive directors and some of the issues surrounding compensation of non-executive directors. So essentially, we would want to compensate non-executive directors for the work that they have done in monitoring the executive, but depend also on the size of the company. Perhaps the argument here is that we should compensate non-executive directors more if the size of the company is larger and more complex in terms of its operations. So a lot more work needs to be put in order to monitor the performance of the executive. And connected to that would be, the compensation should tie in with the amount of effort that is being placed in actually performing their work as non-executive directors, and this is reflected in the time spent. There is a debate on whether we should reward non-executive directors using shares or using options, share options. And the argument here is that if we use share options, then the tendency would be non-executive directors may want to focus on short-term gains in the share price, which is not what we want them to look at. We want them to look at something that is more long-term. So giving them a restricted share plan may be a better option when it comes to shares. So these are some of the issues surrounding rewarding non-executive directors. And finally, looking at some of the disclosure requirement surrounding directors' remuneration. And this is really tasked to, in most companies, to the remuneration committee. So the remuneration committee, the chair of the remuneration committee will really need to look at the amount of information that needs to be disclosed. And the idea here is when it comes to compensation to directors, we should be more accountable and more transparent in terms of the process and procedures in arriving at the right compensation packages. So we need to disclose to the shareholders and other stakeholders the executive remuneration policy that has been developed by the company, so that there's feedback that can be received from the shareholders on the appropriateness of this policy. We should also the company should also disclose details concerning the elements of the director's remuneration and the justification of giving the difference between cash, the amount given in cash, the amount given in kind, the amount given in shares or share options. And this is another key disclosure item, is really if there are performance indicators tied to the compensation, then how is this performance measured and why are these specific performance measures being selected? And if there has been a consultation with remuneration advisors and specialists, then details about these remuneration consultants need to be provided. And the independence of these people are critical, so that we know that the compensation packages has been objectively determined. And the chairman of the remuneration committee needs to be available at the annual general meeting to answer any question that may be raised by shareholders and other stakeholders. And finally, there is in recent times there is also an opportunity for shareholders to vote on these remuneration packages. This has been termed as using the term say on pay, which allows shareholders to have a say into how the rewards are being determined for executive directors. So these are some of the disclosure items that are required concerning executive compensation, especially in large companies. So in summary, we have looked at some of the key debates surrounding the director's remuneration, and essentially it centers around how much the quantum and the connection of compensation to performance, how is it determined, and whether it's reasonable or not. So that has been the key debate. We've looked at some of the key elements of directors' remuneration between cash compensation versus non-cash compensation as well. We have revisited the role of the remuneration committee, but also looked at the role of the remuneration consultants in validating the opinion of the remuneration committee. We've also looked at some of the key performance measures that can be used, and the idea here is that performance measures that focuses on long-term performance should be the focus rather than short-term gains. And finally, we've looked at some issues surrounding the remuneration of non-executive directors, and also the disclosure requirements of directors' remuneration. So I hope that this video has given you a snapshot understanding of some of the key issues related to directors' remuneration. So till I see you again in the next video, bye for now.